Don't forget to like and subscribe to Jolie Knots Crochet. Hit share, go ahead and share with your friends, or you can hit that little bell to get notifications when new patterns release. Hi everyone, welcome back to Jolie Knots Crochet. I am Crystal, and today we are going to be making this gorgeous Granny with Love blanket. This one that I have here measures from one side to the other side, 44 inches. We've got our border made of drunken grannies and fans, and these beautiful hearts made out of the granny stitch. This tutorial is going to be released in 3 parts. Today we're going to be working on part 1. All right, the supplies that we're going to need for this: scissors. I'm using a 5mm hook, your tapestry needle, and I used 3 skeins of the Lions brand Mandala yarn. This color is Gnome, which I believe is discontinued now. How we're going to work this is corner to corner. So we're going to start here at this corner, and our first video is going to be increasing, all of the increases. Part 2 is going to be our decreases. So part 1 is increasing, part 2 is decreasing, and then part 3, I'll teach you how to do the border. All right, let's go ahead and grab our yarns and our hook and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is get started with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 5. Into the 4th chain from the hook, we're going to add 2 double crochets. Now into the 5th chain, we're going to add 2 double crochets. You should have 5 double crochets, and that is going to be your first row. Row 2, we're going to chain 3, turn your work, and we're going to put 2 double crochets into that first stitch. We're going to end every row in our increase with 2 double crochets in the beginning of the row. 3 double crochets in the beginning of the row and 3 double crochets at the end of the row. 1 double crochet in the next, 1 double crochet in the next, 1 double crochet in the next, and now we're at the last stitch. So we're going to put 3 double crochets into the top of that chain 3 space. Just like that. And that's going to be the end of your second row. You should have 3 in the beginning, 3 in the end, and 3 right in the middle. Row 3, chain 3, turn your work, 2 double crochets, 1 double crochet all the way across into each stitch, and then we'll have 3 double crochets on the top of our 3rd chain. Top of your 3rd chain, 3 double crochets. And that's your 3rd row. Beginning row 4, chain 3, 2 double crochets in that beginning. So we have 3 double crochets into our first stitch. Now we're going to put 5 double crochets into the next 5 stitches. So you should have 8 double crochets, and that should bring you right to your center stitch. Now we're going to chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and double crochet into the stitch after that and into each of the next 4 stitches. So you'll have 5 double crochets leading up to your last stitch. Then we will put 3 double crochets right into the top of our chain 3. So what you should have now is 1 chain 1 space with 8 double crochets on each side. Getting started on row 5, we're going to chain 3, put our 2 double crochets, then we're going to double crochet into the next 5 stitches. With 2 stitches left before our chain 1 space, we're going to chain 1 and put 3 double crochets into our chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip 2 stitches, and put a double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches. With 1 stitch left being our chain 3 space, we're going to put 3 double crochets. And that is what your row 5 should look like. Moving on to row 6, chain 3. Turn your work and put 2 double crochets. Double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches. And now you should have 2 stitches left before your first chain 1 space. Chain 1, 3 double crochets into that space. Chain 1, skip the next 3 stitches and 3 double crochets into the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip 2 stitches and a double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches. Bringing us to our last stitch, 3 double crochets into the top of that chain 3 space. And that is going to be what your row 6 will look like. If your yarn or your pattern is getting a little bit wonky, it'll work out, don't worry. If it doesn't look totally like a square, it will as we get farther. All right, getting started on row 7, chain 3, turn your work, 2 double crochets into that first stitch to make 3 double crochets, 1 double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches. Chain 1, skip 2 stitches, 3 double crochets into that first space. We're just creating these granny stitches. Chain 1, granny stitch, which is 3 double crochets into that next space. chain one, skip these 3 double crochets, and granny stitch right back into that last chain space, chain one, skipping 2, 1 double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches. Now we're at the last stitch, and we're putting 3 double crochets right into the top of that chain 3 space. And that's going to complete your 7th row. All right, moving on to row 8, chain 3, turn your work, 2 double crochets into the first stitch, 1 double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches, chain 1, skip 2 stitches, 3 double crochets into the next space. You're going to continue this all the way across, so you're going to have 4 groups of 3, so you'll have 4 granny stitches, and then in the next row you'll have 5. Go ahead and complete this row, complete the next row, and I will meet you back at the start of row 10. Okay, I've got row 9 completed, and you should have 5 groups of granny stitches with the chain spaces in between them and 8 double crochets on each side. Now for our next row, row 10, you're going to chain 3, double crochet 2 times into that same stitch. We are going to double crochet in each of the next 7 stitches. That should bring you up to the last crochet before your chain 1 space from the previous row. What we're going to do now is chain 1 and 1 double crochet into that space. Chain 1, granny stitch, chain 1, granny stitch into the next space, chain 1, granny stitch. So you should have 4 groups of granny stitches, 1 in each space between this chain 1 and 1 double crochet. So just like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Now we're going to chain 1, double crochet into the next space, chain 1, and now we're going to double crochet on top of the next double crochet. And we're going to do that in each of the next 7 stitches. And we're going to put 3 double crochets right onto the top of that chain 3 space. So your row 10 should have 10 double crochets on each side. Should have 10 double crochets, chain 1, 1 double crochet into that space, chain 1, granny stitch, chain 1. So 4 of those across, and then this side is really just mirroring this side. Moving on to row 11, chain 3, 2 double crochets right into that first space, and we're going to double crochet in each of the next 9 stitches. And that should bring you right up again to the last double crochet before your chain 1 space. All right? Chain 1, skip this space, and into the next space, we're going to put our granny stitch. Chain 1, skip the next granny stitch, and into the next space, we're going to put another granny stitch. And we are going to do that across until we have 5 groups of granny stitches with chain 1 spaces between. Now at the end, we're chaining 1 after our last granny stitch, skipping the last space, and double crocheting right into this next double crochet. And we are going to double crochet in each stitch across. You'll have 9 double crochets and then 3 double crochets in the top of your chain 3. So just like that. I thought my color change was coming, but I guess not. We're getting close. Okay, so right now you should see that it's kind of starting your heart shape. We have got 1 more row to complete the heart. So chain 3, turn your work, 2 double crochets into that first space, just like that. And we're going to put 1 double crochet in each of the next 11 double crochets. Just like that. Now we're going to put 2 double crochets into the chain space. We're going to chain 1, skip 1 granny stitch and put another granny stitch into the next space. Chain 1, skip the next granny stitch and put 2 double crochets into the next chain 1 space. Just like that. Now we're going to put 1 double crochet on top of each of these 3 double crochets. And then we're going to put 2 double crochets into the chain space. So you should have 2 double crochets in this space, chain 1, granny stitch, chain 1, 2 double crochets into the next space, 1 double crochet on top of each of the double crochets from the granny stitch below, and then 2 more double crochets into that next space. Now we're going to chain 1 and put a granny stitch into the next chain 1 space. Chain 1 and put 2 double crochets into the next chain 1 space. Now that's going to bring you to the last part of your double crochets, and we're going to put 11 double crochets, one on each of the next 11 double crochets. Now that we're at the end, we're going to put our 3 double crochets right on top of that chain 3 space. Okay, so we have just completed our first heart. Isn't that cute? I love it. Okay, so rows 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 are pretty much going to be these same rows. However, we're going to have a series of stitches in between your hearts to keep the increase, okay? So let me show you. Chain 3, turn your work, and double crochet into the first stitch 2 times, just like normal. Now we're creating a new heart, so in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the first 6 rows of the heart, you're going to have 8 double crochets, skipping 2 stitches, chaining 1, and then your granny stitch in between. And in each of those rows, you're going to increase your granny stitches to 5 groups, okay? So double crochet into the next 5 stitches because we've already got our 3 here. Just like that. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these rows are going to be your repeat rows for your increase, but each one you're actually increasing 1 heart, okay? So this is row 13. Chain 1, skip 1 space, double crochet into the next. Now we're going to have a series of double crochets across till we get to our next chain 1 space, and that will be the first points of our next 2 hearts in this row. So you're going to have 35 double crochets. You're going to double crochet in every single stitch, whether it be a double crochet or a chain space. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is going to be in your chain space. That's a really a good tip to remember when you're just starting your hearts, that your 10th stitch after your first chain space will fall into the first chain space of the row following, okay? 11, 12, 13, 14 into the chain space, 15, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, yes, sorry, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Your 26th stitch should always fall into the last chain space of that heart, okay? So 10th double crochet, 26th double crochet. This row is your setup row, so it's really important to get your stitches right for this row, or it's going to mess up the whole form of your heart, okay? So 26, oops, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and 35. Now that's the only row I'm going to go through all 35 with you, but that's just because I wanted to show you and give you that tip of where your stitches are going to fall. so that way you can keep yourself on track. All right, so after your 35 stitches, you're going to chain 1, skip 1 stitch, double crochet into the next 5 stitches. And then we're going to have 3 double crochets into the top of the chain 3, just like normal. Our hearts are always starting from the bottom row with 8 on each side. Chain 3, turn your work, and now you're going to double crochet 2 times into the first stitch, 1 time into each of the next 5 stitches, and now you should have 2 stitches left before your chain 1 space. Chain 1, put a granny stitch right into that chain 1 space. Chain 1. Now, we are going to double crochet all the way across, skipping the first 2 stitches, and then your last double crochet should be 2 stitches before this chain 1 space. So we had 35 double crochets here. On the next row, we're going to have 31 double crochets. So we're decreasing between our hearts by 4 stitches. So row 13 had 35, row 14 is going to have 31. Go ahead, skip your first 2 double crochets, double crochet into the 3rd double crochet after your chain space, and then 30 more times, and I will meet you right back here. And 31. Now we should have 2 stitches left before our chain 1 space. We're going to chain 1 and put a granny stitch right into the chain space. Chain 1, skip 2 stitches, double crochet in each of the next 5 stitches, and then 3 double crochets on the top of your chain 3 space. All right, and that completes your 14th row. All right. Getting started on row 15, we're chaining 3, turning our work, and essentially row 15 is going to be the same as your row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as your row 6. So we're going to be increasing a granny stitch until we get to 5 groups of grannies. So we've got 1 here. This row is going to have 2. You're going to have 4 stitches less than the 31 on this side, so you'll have 29 stitches in between. You'll have 2 double crochets left before your first chain 1 space, and then you'll put your granny stitch here and your granny stitch here, separated by chain 1 spaces, skipping 2 double crochets, double crocheting into the next 5 stitches, and then 3 in your last stitch, which will be the top of your chain 3 space. Okay, so go ahead and complete that row, and I will meet you at the end. Okay, so we have just completed row 15. You should have had 27 stitches between your hearts. Now, row 16, you're going to have 3 granny groups and 23 stitches between your hearts. Row 17 is going to have 4 granny groups, 19 stitches between your heart, and then the next row, row 18, is going to have 5 granny groups, just like this, and then you're going to have 15 stitches between your hearts. And then we're going to get started on shaping the sides. So why don't you go ahead and complete the next 3 rows, really easy, just increasing 1 granny stitch in each heart. And I will meet you back here. Okay, so here I am at the end of row 18. You should have 5 groups of grannies across, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You should have 15 stitches between your grannies and your chain 1 space, and like normal, your 8 stitches on either side. Okay, so the row that we are going to be working on right now, row 19, is going to be this row where we're going to start forming our heart, and it will be 4 granny stitches in between. All right, so what we're going to do is chain 3. I also got to my color change. I'm very excited about that. 2 double crochets into the first stitch, and 7 double crochets, 1 in each of the next 7 stitches. So you should have 10 stitches, 3 on the end, and 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that should bring you to your first chain space, chain 1, double crochet into that space, chain 1, granny stitch, chain 1, granny stitch into the next 4 spaces. So that's 1. This is 2. This is 3. And this is 4. Chain 1, 1 double crochet into the last, into the last space, chain 1, and then starting on top of this first double crochet, we are going to start again our series of double crochets, and you will again have 15 double crochets. All right, so your 15th double crochet should have fallen in the last double crochet before your chain 1 space. Chain 1 and put 1 double crochet into that space, chain 1, granny stitch 4 times, chain 1, granny stitch 4 times. Coming up to our last space, we've got our chain 1, 1 double crochet, chain 1, double crochet on top of the next double crochet, 7 times, 7 double crochets on each of the next 1 on each of the next 7 stitches. And then 3 into the top of the chain 3. All right, and that completes row 19. We're almost done with our second row of hearts. We've got 2 rows left, and then you're gonna repeat rows 13 to 21 until you get to the size of the blanket that you want as far as the length and the width. This pattern is square, so you will grow it all the way of the width that you want. We're going to put a couple more rows in our decrease round before we start decreasing, but really, I mean, I don't know, maybe 2 inches will have extra beyond your where your stopping point is. So the width that you want, as well as the height or the length that you want, is where you're going to keep going. So moving on to row 20, we are chaining 3, putting 2 double crochets into that first stitch, and then we are going to put 9 double crochets in one in each of the next double crochets. 1,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
and 9 should take you to the top of the last double crochet before your first chain 1 space. All right, and then we're going to chain 1. We're going to skip that chain 1 space, and into the next chain 1 space, we're going to put a granny stitch. Chain 1, granny stitch until you have 5 granny stitch groups. So this is 3, 4, and 5. Chain 1, skip the double crochet, skip the chain 1 space, working into the top of the next double crochet. Yet again, we are going to have 15 double crochets across. All right, and 15 should land right on top of the double crochet before your chain 1 space in the previous row. And again, we're going to repeat this where you've got chain 1, granny stitch, chain 1, granny stitch, chain 1, granny, so you have 5 grannies around, skipping that chain 1 space and working into the second chain 1 space. So go ahead and finish that row out, and I will meet you back at the start for round 21. All right, so I have just completed row 20. Moving on to row 21, which is the last row of your increase repeat. We are chaining 3, putting our 2 double crochets back into that first stitch. And then we are going to double crochet in each of the next 11 stitches. All right, and 11 should again bring you right up to the last double crochet before the chain 1 space. Now we're going to put 2 double crochets right into that space. Chain 1, put a granny stitch into the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, 2 double crochets into the next space, and then 3 double crochets, 1 double crochet on each of the next 3 stitches, and then 2 double crochets back into the space right after that. So you should look like this so far. Chain 1, granny stitch in the next space, chain 1, and 2 double crochets into the next space. And yet again, that should bring us to the top of the double crochet here, where you're going to put 15 double crochets across. Okay, now that you've got your 15th stitch, The top of this heart is going to look exactly like the top of this heart. And then you will have completed, this is your 13th row, and this is your 21st row. These rows are your increase rows. So you're gonna repeat that however many more times you want the size of your blanket to be. Each time you do an increase, you are going to have one more heart. So when you're starting your increase over here, your heart's going to start right around here after your 8 double crochets. After your 35 double crochets, you will have your chain space right between these two hearts. You will have 35 more double crochets, and then you will have one chain space on the end. So each row you are going to increase one. So repeat again, like I said, rows 13 to 21 until you get to the size of the blanket that you want. Come back here, meet me again for part 2 of the With Love Granny crochet along, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, share with your friends, leave me a comment, let me know what kind of tutorials you want to see next. Find me on social media, in Facebook under Jolie Knots Crochet, and show me the colors that you've chosen.